Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you? I know you had half of South America staying at your place this week. Came down for the Brighton-Roma game, which I have to say as well, in the first half was one of the most delightful displays of shithousery I've seen from the football team in a long time, but clearly an exciting time for you, Kieran.
It was. Yes, I had some of my students come down. They're from Colombia, Argentina, Mexico, Canada. Lots. We have a very international base at the university. So that was great. We're out, but it's got me out of a slight problem as well, because I clearly have blanked off all of the dates for the remainder of the competition. And I've also been invited to Buckingham Palace for services to football, which clashed with the Europa League final. Now, for me, that's not a difficult decision. For the Baroness, it is also not a difficult decision, but in the opposite direction. She's already looking at big hats. So we've lost, yes, but we've had a great adventure, and it gets me out of a domestic problem.
I'd have happily stepped in to take your place at Buckingham Palace. Yeah, well, I'm going to guess. I know the name of the person who invited you to Buckingham Palace. Would it start with a T?
I can't possibly say.
Okay, well that's lovely. So you're going to the garden party at Buckingham Palace?
I'm going to a garden party. Yes.
Well, I never.
Yeah.
And there's me about to wish all our Irish listeners a happy St Patrick's Day. It's the day after St Patrick's Day, so I hope all our Irish listeners had a lovely time and are recovering. St Patrick, God rest her soul, was my mum's favourite saint, not only because she was a sitcom Irish woman, but she hated snakes. So she was always very fond of St Patrick. I think we should mention, Kieran, it is Questions Day. It is Monday, but we are expecting a huge news story today. So we will deal with it on Thursday if it happens as we're expecting on Monday. So the reason we aren't covering it today is because it hasn't happened yet, but we're predicting this, Kieran.
Yes, Nottingham Forest, we know that the commission has sat. If you take a look at the small print of the Premier League rulebook, a verdict has to be given within 7 days. I think the clubs are also allowed 1 working day to review the case. There's lots of rumour and counter-rumour going around. There is also a concern, as we've discussed previously, that if there is an appeal, then that appeal won't be heard until after the season has finished, which would make a mockery potentially of relegation issues at the bottom end of the Premier League. So one of the things which has filtered through to us is accept the penalty, but the penalty will be slightly reduced if you agree not to appeal. And again, how many points if found guilty, and innocent until proven guilty, of course. Gut reaction is I think it will be 5, perhaps 4 points for Forest. But we wait to see. I would expect it to come out on Monday morning, and as you rightly said, we'll discuss it in more depth when we've had a chance to read the Commission's report on the Thursday show.
Well, both teams have kind of admitted that they did break the regulations. They're just their argument is the reasons why that happened. So I think most people would be surprised if there wasn't a points deduction. I think it is, as you say, it's just the question of how long it is, and it's just the timing here. And the timing does play into the hands of what we initially thought was a conspiracy theory, that perhaps there were some discussions going on about lowering the tariff, but not allowing them to appeal. Because we simply can't have a situation, Kieran, where we don't know. I mean, Luton played Forest on Saturday. in the end, the point was probably neither good for each team. But if Luton had known beforehand whether Forest had a points deduction or were going to appeal, then that would change the approach to the game. You guess. So it's got you. We can't have a situation where the season ends and then 3 days later the table might be adjusted.
I think it would make a mockery of the spirit of the game. We have this idea of competitive balance. We have this idea that when we go to a match, we know what we do. So I went to the Brighton-Roma match on Thursday night. We knew we had to score 4 goals. Now we didn't, so therefore we lost. But if it had been, you'd have to score 4 goals, but perhaps Roma might have had an ineligible player in the first game, and in which case they would have been sanctioned by 3 goals. That would have changed the complete makeup of the strategy for both teams, and we potentially could be entering this as we're now into sort of the last 10 to dozen games of the season. As far as the Premier League is concerned, it's not fair on the professionals playing the game. That's the managers and the players, and people will say, well, you go into every match trying to win. No, you go into every match with a game plan as to what we consider to be, essential versus desirable aren't the same thing. Yes, you desire to win every match. It's essential that we don't lose, can be the case, or it can be essential that we pick up a point. And you don't know that from this position unless we get a lot of clarity very, very quickly. And also, it doesn't help the Premier League's viewpoint that the independent regulator is a costly distraction, and that the Premier League are perfectly capable of managing their own affairs, and that self-regulation is all tickety-boo.
Yeah, it's damaged the credibility of the Premier League without any doubt, but luckily for the Premier League, it's not going to damage the huge numbers of people who watch it on TV around the world.
Oh no, they are driven by the fact that it's a fantastic product. There is uncertainty. We might have watched a match or two ourselves yesterday on the television, just in between the rugby.
Yeah, sort of us. There's those Saturdays when your team's not, you're kind of lying on the sofa with your eye half open, really.
Yes.
Oh, someone scored. I should mention this is a message for those people, and I know there are lots of them who watch this on YouTube now. Those people maybe notice that I'm holding my head at a slightly odd angle. That's partly because it's St. Patrick's Day yesterday, but also it's partly because we've got producer guy sent us these ring lights to put on top of our laptop. There's only one way I can hold my head, which doesn't look like Joe 90 being targeted by various aliens by 2 massive circles of light in my glasses. So that's why I'm holding my head at a slightly, I'm going to say 74 degree angle, Kieran, I'm going to guess for that. Our first question, Kieran, comes from Runar Olesen, and it's kind of semi-topical. This is unusual for Kieran, for Guy to jump a queue with a question, but you'll find if we waited for another year, people would be going, what the? Morecambe are in League 2, League 3, League 1, Championship, who knows? So we're kind of, we need to ask it now, really. So Runar Olesen says, I've been wondering how much the value is of some of the struggling clubs you've been talking about in recent pods, such as Morecambe and Southend, and also how much money does a prospective buyer need to have? I remember hearing about owners needing proof of funds to fund the club for X amount of time. How much is that as a proportion of buying price?
Well, Runar, thank you for the question. The answer is, it depends. I thought I'd get that elephant out of the room early doors, because you have to determine exactly what are you buying. In the case of Morecambe and Southend, are you buying, for example, the stadium, or has the owner transferred the stadium to another company? As we've seen in the case of Reading, as we've seen in the case of Derby, there were issues in relation to stadium ownership with regards to Coventry City as well. Congratulations to Coventry, by the way, for going to Wembley.
Wow.
So you have to identify the assets that you're acquiring. Yes, you'll be buying the name of the club. Yes, you'll be inheriting the player registrations. But no disrespect to either of these clubs, so the player registrations for Morecambe and Southend players will not themselves be particularly valuable, because the chances are the players will all be on 1 year or 2 year contracts, and they are at the lower league levels. So the real estate, the property assets are a big determinant, and we've certainly seen this in relation to Reading, where it now looks as if the club owner is going to sell the training facilities at what appears to be a knockdown price to Wycombe Wanderers. It'd be interesting to see into which bank account that gets paid, because the training facilities aren't owned by Reading Football Club itself. It all starts to get very, very complicated. So the price is very variable depending on what you're acquiring, and also what you're inheriting in terms of liabilities. Does the club owe a lot of money to HMRC? Are there outstanding transfer fees due, and so on? So it's very difficult to get a definitive price. If the club is not in financial difficulties, then what I'd normally be advising on would be somewhere in the region of 1.5 to 2 times revenue. That's sort of the broad numbers we'd be looking at. And you say, let's take a look at the club's sustainable revenue generation. So that's the issue. Now, and also, so Runar raised a valid point in terms of what about the responsibilities of the governing bodies, the EFL or the National League? Well, certainly as far as the EFL are concerned, what they tend to do is to say, okay, you've got the price on one hand, but Bury Football Club was sold for £1, Scunthorpe United was sold for £3, Brighton was sold for £56 back in 1995. So the price actually isn't of critical issue. It's, do you have those ongoing funds to finance the club's expected level of losses or profits, which doesn't tend to be the case in a struggling club. And then I think you'd normally be looking for probably a 2-year period. So can you put together a budget? Now, you can put together a budget and not adhere to them. And we saw this at Wigan, and we've seen this at Bury and at other clubs. But at least you can then say, okay, well, that's what we think it's going to cost to run the club. Now show us the money. So that's the issue, which tends to be the case. So I'd normally be looking for an 18-month to 2-year period with respect to ongoing losses.
I did properly watch, Kieran, with both eyes, the last 5 minutes of the Wolves Coventry game. And that was proper FA Cup. I mean, that was just fantastic. But the Reading Wycombe situation, Kieran, is just weird. I mean, you mentioned on the last pod a friend of yours who is a Wycombe fan, who has no time for Reading because they're big rivals, but who'd bought a Reading shirt because he wanted to make some small donation to the club. And now here Reading fans are in a situation where their training ground could possibly be sold to their great local rivals at a lot less money than it seems to be worth. So it's a strength. So while Reading fans on one hand, with their financial hat on, are probably going, well, this is all right except for the price. With their football fan hat on, I'd be furious if Brighton bought Palace's training ground at a cut price, even if it helped the club to survive.
That's right, because you still see it as being part of the broader identity of the club. This is where Wilfred Zaha learned his trade in terms of coming through the academy and so on. So I absolutely would understand that. It does seem quite a lot of money. If you take a look at the finances of Wycombe itself, the alleged price is around about 22 million. If you go onto the accounts of a company, and I think one of us in this conversation has been looking at Companies House for RFC Bearwood Limited. It's in there at a cost of over 40 million, and so it's clearly at a discount. You then look to see what has happened at other clubs. We saw Mike Ashley acquire the Coventry Buildings Society Stadium, or the RICO, as it's more properly known, when that company went into administration, and then he immediately signed up a rental agreement with the new owners of Coventry. So it could be that the Wycombe owner, Rob Cohig, will rent it back to Reading. Or if Reading are taken over, he could have bought it for 22 million. He then goes to the new owner and says, tell you what, his original cost was 30. I bought it for 22. Let's split the difference. I'll flog it to you for just over 30. He wins. The new owners get it at a lower price. There are so many layers of complexity here. We're sadly not dealing with a football club. We are dealing with the Dion Dublin area of flipping properties, and you see on those programs, if you watch them, I personally don't, but the Baroness is no stranger to a house program, and she says, "Oh, you see how much money they made?" I said, "Well, that's their business." And to some owners, this is an opportunity for a business transaction, which has got nothing to do with football.
Yeah, you see how much money they make on the programs that are edited and sent out. You don't see how much money they lose on the programs that don't get broadcast.
Yes.
Basically, you might like to point that out to the Baroness, bless her. So this is either, depending on whether you're a Wickham fan or a Reading fan, this is either a generous act of charity or a piece of cynical opportunism, isn't it?
And it could be both.
Okay.
He didn't have to do it. We've had Rob Cohig on the show. He's quite a forthright guy. We'd happily have Di Younger on the show, but he doesn't appear to be willing to talk to anybody.
And just to clarify, Kieran, RFC Bearwood?
RFC Bearwood is the property company that was set up when the training facilities were acquired. And this itself is owned by a company called Resale, which itself also owns Reading Football Club, and Resale also owns the Madejski. It is not the Select Car Leasing Stadium; it is the Madejski.
Yeah. Well, that information resolves the issue for those listening at home. Going, I wonder which one of them was been at the company's house. Kieran didn't specify which of them it was. He just said one of us. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Will Fry. It just made me think of Futurama. I'm sorry when this question came in. It just made me laugh. It's a great name, Will. Sorry. Will Fry has this question. If a club were desperate to keep a player, like Spurs were with Harry Kane, could they offer the player shares in the club? Are there any rules to stop that happening?
There are no rules, as far as I'm aware, to stop that happening. And what the club could do under these circumstances is go to the player and say, we will offer you options in the club. And they will be linked to what we refer to as vesting conditions. Now, a vesting condition is that you must do X in order to get these shares. So it could be, if I was the club owner, it could be that you say, well, you must commit yourself to play for Spurs or to play for whoever the club happens to be for the next 3 or 4 years. And then you will end up effectively acquiring 5%, 10% of the club. So that is often used in the tech industry, for example. You've got some very talented person with IT skills, algorithmic skills, creative skills, and so on. You don't want to lose them, and therefore, what you do is you say, "Well, I also can't afford. We're a startup company. We can't afford to pay you what you're worth. Instead of giving you the 200 grand a year you think you're worth, we'll pay you 50." But we'll give you share options as well. And the small print of those share options means that if you leave within the next 3 years, you also lose your right to the options. So that is a way of dealing with things. We've not seen it with football, but at the same time, if we take a look at what has happened in the United States with regards to MLS, we've got Lionel Messi, who is on a $50 million a year contract. But also he gets benefits from Apple and Adidas in respect of merchandise sold and the number of passes that Apple sell, because they now have the MLS rights. We saw with David Beckham himself when he went to, was it LA Galaxy? That as part of his deal is that if he stayed throughout the length of the contract, that would allow him to buy an MLS franchise at a hugely discounted price. So those are alternative methods of giving incentivization to players to see out the length of their contract. So that could appear in football. I've got to be honest, the vast majority of football clubs lose money, as we know. So you'd be buying shares in a loss-making business, which is a private business. Who's going to take those shares off your hands?
Well, 2 questions, Kieran, from somebody as we know, who knows very little about shares. First of all, if we take Harry Kane as the hypothetical example, would he then start getting a dividend from those shares? And secondly, would the very act of offering Harry Kane shares, if it were made public, would that not then drive the share price up?
In terms of dividends, yes, you would get dividends when the shares, when the options turn into shares. But remember, it's only Manchester United who, historically, out of the 92, have tended to pay dividends. So that would be an issue. Would it increase the price of the shares? It then gets quite complicated, because when you do share valuation in respect of options, you'd be using something such as Monte Carlo distribution, Black-Scholes, binomial methods, all of which are very nerdy. It really depends upon how the market. If Harry Kane ended up with 50% of Spurs, it would probably drive the share price down, because the market would say we're giving away too much to him. If he ended up with 2 or 3%, the market might say, well, it means that they're guaranteed Harry Kane for the next 3 years. It's a really smart way of incentivizing him to stay, and it might react in a positive manner. It just simply comes down to the small print.
I'm going to very tentatively and slowly, in the hope that there is a quick answer to this, do my duty and say Monte Carlo distribution, Black-Scholes. I mean, it sounds like the pyramid tent at Glastonbury on a Saturday night. Are these some kind of stock market device? Are they? Or?
Yeah. These are valuation models for stock options, debt share options. They are very mathematical, but they're used to try to justify how much the company is willing to give away. It is nerd central, though.
Our next question comes from Daniel Kelly, who may or may not be our good friend Danny Kelly, who knows. Daniel Kelly says, do you think, with the continuing growth in Premier League revenues, that we may one day see a footballing version of Bobby Bonilla? Bobby Bonilla, it's been a while since we heard that name. Bonilla played baseball with the New York Mets, and in 2000, the Mets agreed to buy out the remaining $5.9 million on Bonilla's contract. And instead of paying Bonilla the $5.9 million, the Mets agreed to make annual payments of nearly $1.2 million for 25 years, starting on July the 1st, 2011, including a negotiated 8% interest. He still has another 13 payments to go, and every July the 1st is now openly celebrated in American sport as Bobby Bonilla Day. Could this be something that may happen in football in years to come, or is something like the Bonilla arrangement even legal? I mean, when we have mentioned this before, Kieran, it's been in terms of humour, basically, because we've mentioned it in passing rather than discuss it in detail. Because I mean, to an outsider like me, it's a ludicrous thing to happen. Could it happen again?
Yes, it could happen. I believe that there has been a similar deal signed in baseball in respect of Todd Bowley's baseball club in recent months. So it's really good from a cash flow point of view. From an FFP point of view, I think things start to get a little bit complicated, because you would say, well, you would have to work out the value of those 25 payments across the period in which he's employed, rather than the period in which he's paid. So we'd have a huge disconnect between when the money was physically paid to him and when the costs would go through, as far as our FFP and account calculations are concerned. But we are seeing clubs do this normally as a means of managing their cash flow, but retaining the talent. So there's not a huge difference between Daniel's question and Will's question. They are looking at creative means of trying to ensure that you recruit and keep the players that make the difference as far as your team is concerned. American tax code rules, as we will see later, are substantially different to those of the UK, and they tend to be quite beneficial towards rich institutions. Is not the same here as far as football clubs' relationships with HMRC were concerned.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Alex Cartledge. And this is a question that's known in the price of football business as a fill your boots question for Kieran. This is a typical FYB question coming Kieran's way. And Alex says, I have a question on how transfer fees that are paid in instalments are accounted for in regards to FFP. Is the full profit realised in the year that the player is sold, regardless of when the payments are actually received? What would happen if the initial instalments are received, but the buying club defaults on subsequent instalments during future years?
Right, again, there's two questions here, so I'm going to once again answer the second question first. If there is a default on payments, then the club which has been wronged, their first course of action would be to report the club that has failed to pay to either FIFA, if it's an international transfer, or the Premier League stroke EFL. And there would tend to be a fairly draconian reaction. You'd certainly be, first thing would be a transfer embargo, then things could start to step up and get a little bit worse. If it's an international transfer, what FIFA won't get involved with is things such as points deductions, but they would normally give perhaps a worldwide transfer embargo to that particular club, which is A, embarrassing, and B, from a trading point of view, is quite restraining. So that's the second question. With regards to the first question from Alex, is the full profit realised? Yes, it is. So once again, we've got a separation of FFP from cash flow, as we've already seen on today's show. The only difference is that if let's say I've got an academy player, I've got Jack Grealish come through the academy, I sell him for £100 million, and the buying club is going to pay over 4 years. What you tend to do is that you work out, say, well, we'd rather 100 million now, as opposed to 25 million a year in 4 installments. So again, you move into the wild and wacky world of financial maths, and you say, isn't that the equivalent of getting 90 million today and effectively getting interest on the other payments over the remaining 3 years? So you do that and use something called present values. So you show a slightly lower amount in terms of the player sale value, but in the remaining years, you show an interest cost. And those figures, the difference between those figures actually can be quite significant. For example, Manchester United published their second quarter results on Thursday and Friday of this week, and they owe other clubs £378 million in terms of unpaid transfer instalments. But of that £378 million, £40 million of that is interest. So they're only going to show 338 now, and they're going to show the interest over the next 2 to 3 years. So it does get really messy. The accountants and the financiers have once again, this is quite a nerdy show, this particular episode. The bond maths team will be filling their boots in terms of giddiness.
The bond maths team?
A bond is effectively a loan, or if you're trying to work out how much interest. If you take out a mortgage, you might have a mortgage at 3%, and then the words APR will appear next to it, and the difference between APR and actual interest is where we get into bond maths.
Oh, I see. I got you. So it's nothing to do with how much gold is worth if you paint it on a semi-naked woman's body.
I don't think so.
Okay. Martin Sterry.
Was that Blofeld in that film?
It was Blofeld, yes.
Yeah.
The same actor. Oh no, let's not go into that. We haven't got time. We're being really nerdy. Let's not veer off into actors that were in The Longest Day and James Bond villains. Martin Sterry has our next question. Martin says, I'm a Palace fan, exiled in East Anglia. Martin, it could be worse. Much as I love the place, I'm willing to accept there are parts of Norfolk and Suffolk that may more be attractive than Thornton Heath. Although there are occasionally, if you're on Lloyd Park on a misty morning, you can half close your eyes and almost see John Constable painting a hay wain. But for the most part, Martin, you're living in the beautiful part of the world. But Martin's not only a Palace fan, Kieran, he's been following the pod since the start. So two big ticks in the Martin box. And Martin says, you've previously said that when owners look to return a profit for their clients, such as the current owners of Ipswich Town, they usually look to stick around for 5 to 7 years, then sell up. The new Ipswich owners have been at Ipswich for around 2 years now and have invested heavily. So what's their best exit strategy? Risk the financial madness of the Championship and try to get promoted to the Premier League, or find a bigger fool to buy the club off them while their stock is higher? I'm guessing this is from the stockpile of questions, Kieran, because we know the answer to that now, as Ipswich are very much heading for the Premier League or making an attempt to head for the Premier League.
Yeah, they've had a fantastic season and good luck to them. It's great to see a club come from League One Championship and then push on. Luton have done it. So it's one of those things which helps us to keep the faith in the game. Otherwise, there is that danger of becoming cynical and saying that we've actually got a Premier League of 25 clubs and they're just sort of rotating the bottom 6 on a 2 or 3 year basis. So it'll be great for Ipswich fans, I would imagine, if they are promoted. As far as this sort of 5 to 7 year period is concerned, in the world of private equity, and people that aren't familiar with private equity funds look after the money of not millionaires, but multimillionaires and billionaires. And they look to invest in what they perceive as underperforming companies or companies which have the options to grow. They'll go in, they will run those companies for a few years, and they would normally expect to then flip them and make a profit. In the case of Ipswich, I think Ipswich are now connected with an American pension company, which is looking to do the same. Now pension companies tend to have a longer time frame than 5 to 7 years, but they'll be quite happy if Ipswich is there for 10 or 15 years and they can then sell that at a profit. So if you have any investment portfolio, you've got some short-term investments, medium-term investments, and long-term investments. So it looks as if the American owners clearly believe that Ipswich Town has long-term growth potential. And that's what we're seeing from a lot of American owners. Trying to flip in 5 to 7 years can work successfully. If you look at Massimo Cellino at Leeds United, if you look at quite a few other owners, they've come in, they've got the club to the Premier League, they've increased the average attendances or the level of commercial deals and so on, where perhaps clubs have been underperforming and they've made a profit and they've exited. That's sort of the standard private equity route. During that period, the chances are the football club's going to be losing money. So you've got to square off the losses when you've been running it as a business against the profits from the sale. With regards to the bigger fool theory, that does seem to exist in football. In no other industry that I've ever seen do you have a set of circumstances where 90% of the clubs or 90% of the companies are losing money, and yet there is still a long stream, a long queue of people wanting to buy in. If we look at our friends who do the price of music, they've been speaking at length with regards to the number of music venues that have been closing down. Well, why isn't there a queue of people wanting to buy music venues? Because they've done the sums and they realise it simply doesn't work. Whereas in football, either out of an emotional attachment to that town or city, or the belief that the people who have been running the club are idiots and I know better, and there's an awful lot of I know betters, that they still come in. So I don't think the owners of Ipswich will necessarily be looking for an exit in the next few years. I think it does seem as a long-term investment. But getting to the Premier League, what they will find is that their phone will start ringing. And there will be a large number of interested parties who say, congratulations on going into the Premier League. We've always loved, looks up, Ipswich, and we want to invest. And we either want to become a minority investor or we will give you an offer which will be daft to refuse.
This next question, Kieran, takes a bit of listening to. There's a bit of detail, but it's worth the listening. And it's a scenario that I think a lot of football fans may recognise about the selling on of tickets. And it comes from Nigel. It says in brackets, Nigel wants to keep his surname private. I suspect that maybe because Nigel is asking for a friend. But Nigel says, I have a question about the resale of season tickets at Premier League clubs by existing season ticket holders. Recently, I spoke to somebody who 3 or 4 times a season takes his son to watch the top Premier League team. He tells me that he is supplied with the telephone number of an existing season ticket holder. They arrange to meet somewhere near the ground, and the 2 season tickets are handed over in exchange for £300 each and leaving some collateral, like a passport, to ensure that he brings a season ticket back to the pub after the game. We've already mentioned James Bond. It's not working at James Bond levels, is it? By my estimation, if that season ticket holder has 19 league games in a season, with 2 season tickets at £300 each, and they're making approximately £11,400 per season. At the club, it's approximately £600 to £800 per adult season tickets and £400 per child. Therefore, that person is making 10 grand pure profit per season. So this is at least breaking the season ticket terms and conditions, but is it also illegal? Now, I suspect, Kieran, that 99% of our listeners will either know of someone like this or will have heard of someone like this, because it's one of those things that obsesses football fans. A, if they can't get to a game, why can't they give their season ticket to a mate? And B, there's always somebody that we've heard of who's making a lot of money out of peddling their season ticket.
Yeah, I know Billy the Tout. He has access for up to 80 tickets at a very high-profile Premier League club. And what we now have is a battle between the clubs and the season ticket holders. First of all, again, I'm going to answer the second question first. Is this illegal? Well, yes, under Section 1666 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994, it is illegal to sell tickets on the secondary market without the permission of the club. So therefore, what we do have is that we have some clubs that have relationships with the likes of Viagogo or Ticketmaster or Seatwave, and they act as effectively as the official secondary market. And the agents get a cut of this, the original owner gets a cut of this, and the football club gets a cut of this as well. We also see quite a few football clubs who say to fans, yeah, look, we appreciate that you can't attend all 19 matches. There is a lot of demand, and therefore we will have a ticket exchange. And I think we spoke about Spurs in the most recent show, putting up season ticket prices, making life more difficult for senior fans. But also they have started to get a bit more draconian in terms of the number of matches which you can't attend. And what they're now saying is that if you can't make a match and you go through the official ticket exchange, you will get 1/19 of your season ticket price back. So therefore you don't financially lose out. The club will sell on that ticket. If you fail to do that, if you simply don't turn up, I think Spurs have said that if you miss more than 2 matches, they reserve the right to effectively take your season ticket away. And there's a long list. Now, will those tickets be renewed as season tickets? I suspect the answer is no. Certainly, I'm aware of at least one other very well-known Premier League club, again, operates that ticket exchange. But what it tends to do, and this tends to be the case if you're sending back a pair of tickets, what it will do is to say, we're not going to sell those to even the normal members of the club. We're going to repackage that as a hospitality package. And what they will then do is that you buy the tickets, instead of paying 50 or 60 quid, it's 130, 140 pounds hospitality package. And what you do, you get a free pie, you get a photograph with a legend in a bar. It won't necessarily even be at the club, because what the clubs are now outsourcing their hospitalities at the very top end. We know, we won't name the clubs, but I think everybody can guess who these clubs are. Football clubs at the elite end do not want season ticket holders because they don't generate as much money. With changes in technology, with the move towards digital tickets, it is becoming more complicated in terms of giving your ticket to a mate. I think the clubs at times take a too draconian point of view. All I can say from my position, as a Brighton fan, my circumstances last year, they were quite complicated with regards to family issues. And sometimes on the day of the match, you prioritise other things. Under those circumstances, say, look, I can't make the match. I don't want to see the seat go empty, so I'm not out to make money from it. But if I do that at Brighton, I get a match ban, I get a 5-match ban. So I think the clubs are trying to do broadly the right thing for them financially. What you don't want is a situation which does exist. And again, I know of at least one club where if you wanted an away ticket, tough luck, you're never going to get one because it goes to people with the highest number of points. And what you might have is a bunch of 20 people who between them share 7 or 8 away tickets, and they make sure that they'll always fill those particular seats. So I'm not saying that the fans are entirely innocent in this, but the clubs aren't either. The clubs view season tickets as, yes, it's useful, but it becomes less useful the higher up the hierarchy of football we go.
Yeah, I know 2 young men, Kieran, who are the children of 2 old men that I've known for a long time. But both these young men work in the ticket office, they're fairly senior level at the ticket office of. They're both London Premier League clubs. I won't divulge which, but you can guess which one of them is. But they both say, in terms of the money, the actual income you're making from getting somebody to resell their ticket, or it's minimal in the great scheme of things. But their biggest issue was midweek games, because what tends to happen in midweek games is that kids aren't allowed to go to some of the midweek games. So basically, they're saying you're getting this ludicrous thing. If you watch closely, if you watch on telly a midweek game at these grounds, the average age of the people in the family enclosure is about 38. and no one pretends that they're a kid, because the scanner doesn't. The people on the actual turnstile don't look up; they just scan the ticket and through you go. So they just kind of, and they always use it when it's security. We need to know who's in the ground, but I still don't see why they can't turn a blind eye. Clearly, it's not an issue where people are giving their tickets to complete strangers who may or may not have nefarious intentions. But for the money involved, you'd imagine clubs would be able to turn a blind eye, but they clearly feel that they have to stay on top of the situation. And they, rightly so, they say we need to know who's in the ground compared to who we think's in the ground.
Yes. Why do they need to know? Yeah, we've got CCTV. We can identify people's faces. So I've always taken the view, and this is sort of my beef with my club, is that if I give a ticket to a friend who misbehaves, then that comes back to me. And I've taken the responsibility. I should be punished. If I can't make a match for financial, for circumstances, I live and work 300 miles apart. So getting to a midweek match in Brighton if I'm teaching the following day is simply not possible. So if I give it to one of my neighbours and he goes along and he watches the match, he'll have a couple of pints, he'll buy a pie. The club makes a bit of money. If they've not sold enough tickets for the ticket exchange to kick in, the chances are that he wouldn't be willing to go to the match anyway, because he's not a dedicated fan. It's something to do, which is better than nothing. And that's where we are. We got to acknowledge, as both Brighton and Palace fans, there isn't 30, 60,000 people who will desperately want to go and see us play at home to Bournemouth or Burnley. But I don't think the clubs have got it right. I know that they will invoke. Well, it is illegal. Yeah, so's driving at 31 miles an hour in the 30-mile-an-hour limit, but you don't get nicked for it every time.
You should. Actually, the club are missing a trick with you. The club should be encouraging you not to go to games. They're going to make more money off your neighbour than they are off you buying the occasional pint of water in the ground.
Yes.
Billy the Tout, by the way, I've meant to ask you this before. Is that what it says on his business card, Billy the Tout? Or was it just...
Well, that's what comes up on my WhatsApp name.
Okay. Yeah, you want to do what the politicians do, Kieran. Refresh those WhatsApp messages every now and again. Refresh and inverted. Because it's amazing, the politicians. You can get away with that excuse once, can't you? Like I would probably do that. I'd become a middle-aged man. I didn't know I was deleting 2,000 weeks worth of WhatsApp messages. Clive Burgess has our next question, Kieran, and I urge you, if possible, to keep this to a yes or no answer, because given who it's about, and given that we've already been recording for nearly an hour, it'd be quite nice to get away by the time Sunday lunch is on the way. Clive Burgess says, did Steve Dale make or lose money from his involvement in Bury FC?
I think he probably has lost money. He was declared bankrupt on the 26th of July 2022, which was following his involvement with Bury Football Club. The cynic in me, and I'm not a cynic, as you know, says, has he manipulated the system? Yeah, and people do deliberately manipulate systems in terms of bankruptcy. He bought Bury Football Club for £1, and then things started to get very murky. If we take a look at the most recent administrator's report, again, this is something for those people that are up at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning pouring through Companies House. If you go to the report of CCFB Realisations Limited, which formerly was called Bury Football Club, you will see that Steve Dale, and this is sort of 2 years after the club's been in administration, Steve Dale is owed money by Bury Football Club, and the administrator says amounts unknown. And you think, well, if you've been checking the records for 2 years and you still don't know, surely that's something a bit strange. In addition, there was £7 million, and this is where it does really start to get murky. There's £7 million owed to a company called RCR Holdings, which by all accounts bought that £7 million worth of debt from the administrator for £70,000, i.e. the administrator says you've got two hopes of getting it, Bob and none, Bob's out of town, that type of thing. So it's all very messy. As much as I can never wish good things to happen to Steve Dale. I don't think he made money from Bury Football Club. I think he chanced his arm, and it didn't work out. He did not realise the extent of the fury of the fans, the degree of scrutiny in which his life would subsequently come. And I think he has probably lost rather than gained with regards to his opportunism.
Where did £7 million worth of debt come from?
Well, that's the bit that's difficult to determine, because by all accounts, the level of sophistication of the accounting records of Bury Football Club was pretty poor. So I'm not convinced that it was ever what you might call a debt which had a good audit trail or paper trail.
Okay. Our penultimate question comes from Aaron Daniels. And Aaron's question, in a similar ballpark, in light of Andy Pilley's conviction for fraud last year, what were the potential consequences for all of the clubs in his football group?
Yeah, for people not familiar with Andy Pilley, he was the owner of Fleetwood Town. He is now in prison for a long number of years. I think it's 7 to 14 years for a rather complicated fraud scheme involving energy companies. And what has happened with respect to Fleetwood, there's a company called Fleetwood Wanderers Limited, which is actually Fleetwood Town, paradoxically. The owner of Fleetwood Wanderers, i.e. Fleetwood Town, is a company called J. Mell Limited, and Pilley used to be the owner, or certainly involved with J. Mell. He's resigned as a director. He's resigned as a director of Fleetwood. So you might say, okay, no more involvement. But then you go to the list of directors and you say, oh, there's new directors, and they've all got the surname Pilley. And again, a bit more ferreting around, it turns out that he's effectively transferred the shares to his children. We therefore go back to the situation that we saw with regards to Blackpool Football Club when they were owned by Owen Oyston, and he went into prison, which meant that he could no longer run the football club. And lo and behold, the shares are transferred to relatives. So,
which is perfectly legal.
Perfectly legal. And there's nothing to stop those relatives independently making decisions which won't necessarily be in alignment with the wishes of their father. Or it could be that they just happen to agree with every single decision that their father has. Not for me to say. I'm not going to say that you'll be cut out the inheritance if you don't do what I say. That'd be a cynical view, and we're not cynics.
Well, you're not. I'm growing. That's never occurred to me before, Kieran. The mere fact that he's in prison and he doesn't own the shares anymore doesn't stop him running the football club. Technically, in a way, by through other means, and also there are other clubs involved. He had a club in Ireland as well, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, we both watched Porridge. We know how Grouty worked. He was messages got out.
That was in 1974, Kieran, in very shaky cardboard cells that clearly wouldn't have held anyone. But it generally hadn't occurred to me, Kieran, that somebody could still be influencing. That's upsetting. Just check.
Could be. I'm not saying it's happened yet.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to say, let's hope our final question cheers me up a bit, but I don't think it's going to. It comes from Marcus McLeod. Marcus says, I read an article recently about the ownership of American sports clubs. It suggested that a driver of interest for billionaires was the ability to utilise the tax losses sports clubs generally generate against their own personal tax gains. Is there any truth to this, and do we see it in football too, i.e. club owners being able to offset tax gains of other companies they own against the tax loss the football club generates? I'm going to go out on a limb here, Kieran, and say, yes, we do see it in football.
We do see it in football. There are more restricted rules in the UK than there are in the USA, but certainly I'm aware of some clubs. I know Middlesbrough have done it historically. They're owned by effectively a company called Gibson O'Neill, and they have historically, they're not doing it anymore, transferred tax losses from the football club to the parent company. But it's far more generous in the United States. So if we take the LA Lakers, the owner of LA Lakers, who I think was one of the owners of Microsoft, he's allowed to write off what it cost him to buy the LA Lakers over a period of 15 years. If you take a look at his tax rate, I think he pays tax on his total income at around about 12%. Whereas you've got the people who are the cleaners paying at 18 or 19%. So, it does seem it does seem unfair, inequitable, I think is the word I would use. But US tax code is very, very much geared towards protecting the interests of the more wealthy than the less wealthy. And some people would argue that that's a function of capitalism. It's not something I'd necessarily agree with. I would take the view that those with the broadest shoulders bear the biggest weight. That seems to be more equitable to me. But don't accuse me of being a lefty. If that makes sense.
It's not an accusation, Kieran. It's something to be proud of, I would say.
Well, I am accused of being all types of things, lefty and a righty.
And a wokey.
Which baffles me.
Yeah, and a wokey.
Wokey, yes.
We're so woke. Let's bringing down Liz Truss's government with our wokery. I'm surprised she didn't mention specifically in her speech that she got $1 million for. The Middlesbrough situation, Kieran, before we end, I mean, that's perfectly legal,
absolutely.
but also possibly beneficial for the football club in that scenario as well. More beneficial for the owner of both the company and the club, but it could work in the club's favour, couldn't it?
Yeah, it does. It means that the overall losses of the football club are reduced. I've seen it at other clubs as well. This, in respect of Middlesbrough, we're probably talking about 7 or 8 years ago. And I know that various chancellors have tried to restrict rules, which is possibly why it's not taking place these days.
Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you, and it'll get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, and you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com, and go to the same website if you want to buy our latest book or get yourself a Price of Football t-shirt. We'll be back on Thursday with our news pod, which we are assuming will headline with Forest at Everton. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you as always to everybody for engaging with us through email, through social media. We do listen. We try to make sure that the show is in line with your values as well, which is why we refuse to take on gambling adverts. Although every time I tell Kevin how much those gambling adverts potentially are worth, he does cry very, very quietly to himself. There's a variety of ways that you can support the show. One of those ways is to give us a review. It helps us in terms of charts. It helps in terms of when we're trying to persuade guests to come on the show. That's the type of things that they look at. By all accounts, it doesn't matter what you say. And yes, it might have been St. Patrick's Day yesterday, but you could even say you would rather have the show presented by two bastions of this country in James Bond and Paddington Bear. And I think that would be a marvellous show.
I love Paddington Bear. Wonka, no, terrible. Paddington Bear, love Paddington
Absolutely.
Bear. I nearly, talking of gambling, I was going to phone Gary Lineker this week. Gary Lineker getting loads of good saintly publicity by announcing that his podcast chain, The Rest Is, will never accept money from gambling companies. And so some of us have been down that road before. I didn't see any headlines in the
Croydon Advertiser.
In the Croydon, yeah. Although the fact that the Daily Mail managed to turn that into a chippy story about Lineker turns down honest gambling money. It's just, I wish you hadn't told me how much we could possibly have got. But yeah, but we stay in Paul Merson's good books. That's the important thing. Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.
Picture this, the roar of a crowd, the tension building, the electrifying moment your team scores the winning goal. Pure joy, right? But for many football fans, barriers can shut them out of that experience. In the UK, nearly 1 in 4 people, that's 16 million, have a disability. And over 70% of those disabilities are non-visible.
There's a really broad range of non-visible disabilities out there. So it can be hearing loss, it can be sight loss, it can be neurodiversity, it can be any manner of things that people can't perceive.
People look, why are they parking in blue badge space? They can walk. Why are they using an accessible toilet? They're walking in. But that's not the point. You can't see the invisibleness of the disability. But then if somebody's judging you, you can tell they haven't got the awareness, they haven't got the understanding.
I've always lived my life as a sighted person who can't see, to the point where then if I didn't have my long cane chancer, a lot of people wouldn't know. Me having it isn't always just for me, but it is actually for other people as well.
Find out how you can contribute to a more inclusive matchday experience for everyone by supporting Level Playing Field, the national charity advocating for greater access and inclusion for all disabled sports fans, through its Unite for Access campaign. Unite for your team, unite as a fan, let's unite for access.